Commander Ra pressed her talons against the bridge of her elongated snout as she reviewed the personnel files on her data pad. The sleek draconian female stood nearly 8 feet tall, her scaled hide shimmering with an iridescent purple that marked her as nobility among her kind. Her reputation as one of the galaxy's most feared military tacticians preceded her wherever she went, and today she felt that reputation being tested by the most ridiculous assignment she'd ever received. "A human," she muttered, her voice carrying the distinctive hiss that all draconians possessed. "They're sending me a human as my new tactical advisor." The bridge of the warship Nemesis hummed with activity around her. Crew members of various species worked at their stations, but none dared interrupt their commander when she displayed such obvious displeasure. Ra had earned her position through brutal efficiency and an absolute intolerance for weakness. Under her command, the Nemesis had become the most successful hunter-killer in the Galactic Defense Forces fleet. She pulled up the human's file again, hoping she had misread something the first 3 times. Age 32, former Earth Defense Force specialist. The photograph showed an unremarkable male with dark hair and brown eyes, standing barely 6 feet tall and weighing perhaps 180 pounds. By galactic standards, he was practically a child. "Commander," her aide, Lieutenant, approached cautiously. The four-armed knew better than to interrupt Ra when she was in a mood, but duty demanded he speak. "The shuttle-carrying advisor has just docked in Bay 7. Ra's serpentine eyes narrowed to slits. "How long until he reports to the bridge?" "He requested 15 minutes to settle his gear and quarters, ma'am." 15 minutes to do what a proper warrior could accomplish in 3, she snapped, already showing his species' legendary inefficiency. The truth was, Ra had never actually encountered a human before. Few beings in the Outer Rim had. Humanity was a newcomer to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. Most established species viewed them as curiosities at best, primitive savages at worst. Their planet was considered backwater, their technology laughably simple, and their military nothing more than children playing with toys. But the Galactic Council, in what Ra considered a misguided attempt at inclusivity, had mandated that all major vessels include at least one human advisor, something about diverse perspectives and untapped potential. The commander found such idealistic nonsense beneath contempt. She had worked too hard to reach her current position to have it undermined by political correctness. Born on Draconis Prime to a military family, she had excelled in every academy, outfought countless opponents in ritual combat, and proven herself in dozens of battles against pirates, rebels, and worse. The idea that some soft-skinned mammal from a primitive world could offer her tactical advice was insulting beyond measure. 20 minutes later, not 15, stepped onto the bridge. Ra turned to examine her new advisor and immediately felt her worst fears confirmed. The human looked even smaller in person, dwarfed by the towering aliens around him. His equipment appeared to be standard-issue GDF gear, nothing special or advanced. He moved with what she supposed passed for confidence among his kind, but to her experienced eye, it seemed like barely controlled nervousness. "Commander Ra," he said, offering what humans called a salute. His voice was steady, she granted him that much. "Tactical advisor reporting for duty." Ra didn't return the gesture. Instead, she loomed over him, using her superior height to establish dominance as draconian tradition demanded. "I trust you understand the reputation of this vessel, human." "Yes, ma'am. The Nemesis has the highest success rate in the 4th Fleet. 17 major operations, 0 failures." "And do you understand why?" Met her gaze without flinching, though she could smell the fierce scent that all mammals produced when confronted by predators. "Because you don't accept weakness or failure, Commander." "Correct. This ship succeeds because every crew member is the absolute best at their specialization. I have collected the finest warriors, tacticians, and specialists from across the galaxy." She leaned closer, letting him feel the heat of her breath. "I am curious to see what value the legendary humans can possibly add to such a collection." The sarcasm in her voice was unmistakable, and several bridge crew members turned to watch the exchange. Seemed to understand that he was being tested, but to his credit, he didn't back down or show obvious intimidation. "I understand your skepticism, Commander. Humans are new to galactic affairs, and we haven't had the chance to prove ourselves in large-scale operations. I hope to change that." "Hope," Ra repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Warriors do not hope, advisor. They prepare, they execute, they succeed, or they die. Hope is what prey animals do while predators circle them. She gestured toward a workstation near the tactical display. Your station. Try not to embarrass yourself too badly. As moved to his assigned position, Ra returned to her command chair, satisfied that she had established the proper hierarchy. The human would serve his mandated tour, contribute nothing of value, and eventually return to his primitive with stories of how real warriors conducted business. The bridge settled back into its normal rhythm, but Ra found herself occasionally glancing toward the human station. Had immediately begun reviewing tactical protocols and fleet formations, apparently trying to familiarize himself with their operational procedures. She supposed that showed some initiative, even if it was ultimately pointless. Commander, communications officer announced from her station. Incoming priority transmission from Fleet Command. Main screen. The forward display shimmered and resolved into the image of Admiral Thane, a massive whose species had evolved from bear-like predators on a high-gravity world. Even via hologram, his presence was intimidating. Scars crisscrossed his fur, marking countless battles, and his small black eyes held the cold intelligence that had made him one of the most successful fleet commanders in GDF history. Commander Ra, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. How quickly can the Nemesis reach the 442 system? Ra's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode. 442 was a remote system near the galactic rim, mostly uninhabited except for a few mining colonies and research stations. 18 hours at maximum warp, sir. What's our mission? We've lost contact with Research Station Echo 7. Last transmission indicated they were tracking an unknown vessel in the outer system. Intelligence suggests it might be a Void Stalker. A chill ran through the bridge crew at those words. The Void Stalkers were apex predators of space, creatures that existed in the dark between stars and hunted anything they could catch. They were virtually indestructible, capable of tearing apart starships with their bare claws, and had never been successfully captured or studied. Most encounters with them ended in complete destruction of any vessel unlucky enough to attract their attention. Orders, Admiral. Investigate and neutralize if necessary. Exercise extreme caution. The Science Council wants that research data recovered, but not at the cost of your ship or crew. Understood, sir. The Nemesis will depart immediately. The transmission ended, and Ra began issuing orders. Navigation, plot a course for 442, maximum warp. Engineering, I want all systems at peak efficiency. If we're hunting a Void Stalker, there's no room for mechanical failure. As the bridge crew jumped into action, she noticed that had pulled up everything available on Void Stalkers and was studying the data intently. At least the human had enough sense to research their potential enemy, though she doubted he would contribute anything useful to the coming operation. The journey passed quickly. During the transit, Ra held several tactical briefings, walking her senior staff through various scenarios they might encounter. Attended these meetings but remained silent, apparently content to observe rather than contribute. She found his reticence appropriate, if somewhat surprising. Most species felt compelled to prove themselves through constant chatter. When they dropped out of warp at the edge of the 442 system, the scene that greeted them was ominous. Research Station Echo 7 hung silent and dark against the star field, its usual navigation lights extinguished. No response came to their hailing attempts, and passive scans revealed no life signs aboard the massive facility. Commander, sensor operator reported from his station. I'm detecting unusual energy signatures near the station. Something big, but it's not showing up on visual scans. Ra studied the tactical display, her experienced mind analyzing the available data. Recommendations, people. How do we proceed? Send a probe first, suggested Lieutenant. Gather more intelligence before we commit to an approach. Launch a fighter squadron, recommended Security Chief, a battle-scarred whose species lived for combat. If there's a stalker out there, better to find out now with small, fast targets. Ra considered both options, then noticed that had raised his hand slightly. She almost ignored him, then curiosity won out. Yes, advisor, do you have something to add? Stood, moving to the main display. With your permission, Commander, I'd like to show you something. She gestured for him to proceed, more amused than interested. Called up a three-dimensional tactical map of the system, then began highlighting various energy readings and debris patterns. The probe and fighter suggestions are both sound, but I think there might be a better approach. Look at these energy signatures near the station. He zoomed in on the area around Echo 7, overlaying sensor data with gravitational readings. These aren't random. There's a pattern here, a rhythm to the energy fluctuations. If this is a void stalker, it's not just lurking near the station. It's actively hunting something. Ra moved closer to examine his analysis. Despite her prejudices, she had to admit that his pattern recognition was impressive. Hunting what? The station had escaped pods, standard complement of 12. I count debris from 8 of them scattered around the local area. That means 4 got away. So the stalker is tracking the survivors. It's using the station as bait, waiting for rescue ships to arrive so it can take them too. That's why the energy signatures are pulsing in search patterns. The bridge fell silent as the implications became clear. If was right, the Nemesis was flying directly into a trap. Interesting theory, Ra admitted grudgingly, but how does that change our approach? It means we can use the stalker's hunting pattern against it. These creatures are apex predators, but they're still predators. They follow behavioral patterns just like any hunter, if we can predict its movements. He manipulated the display again, showing projected patrol routes based on the energy readings. Here, there's a blind spot in its search pattern, probably caused by the station's gravitational shadow. We could approach from this vector, use the station as cover, and potentially catch it between us and its prey. Ra studied the proposal carefully. The logic was sound, and the tactical reasoning showed genuine insight. But she wasn't about to let a human, of all beings, dictate strategy on her ship. An adequate analysis, she said dismissively. However, you've overlooked several factors. Void stalkers are not simple beasts. They possess intelligence and have been known to adapt their tactics when faced with opposition. She called up her own battle plans, pointing to various positions around the system. We'll approach directly, weapons hot, shields at maximum. When we encounter the stalker, we'll hit it with everything we have before it can react. Overwhelming force is the only reliable tactic against such creatures. Opened his mouth as if to object, then seemed to think better of it. He simply nodded and returned to his station. All hands battle stations, Ra commanded. Red alert, we're going in fast and hard. The Nemesis surged forward, its powerful engines driving the warship toward the silent research station. As they approached, the mysterious energy signatures became stronger, and the bridge crew tensed in anticipation of contact. Distance to station, 2 million kilometers and closing, navigation reported. Shields up, weapons online, added the tactical officer. Ra stood at the center of the bridge, her predatory instincts fully engaged. This was what she lived for, the moment of truth when all training and preparation would be tested against a worthy opponent. Her claws extended slightly as adrenaline flooded her system. Commander, sensors called out urgently. Contact bearing 047 Mark 12. It's massive, at least 3 times the size of our ship. On the main screen, space itself seemed to ripple and twist as something enormous moved between the stars. The Void Stalker was nothing like the artistic representations in the databases. It easy description, a living shadow that bent light around itself, revealing its presence only through gravitational distortions and the faint glow of bioluminescent organs along what might have been its flanks. Target acquired, weapons reported. All batteries locked on. Fire. The Nemesis unleashed everything in its arsenal. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and particle beams all struck the creature simultaneously in a spectacular display of destructive force. The void around the target lit up like a miniature star as enough energy to destroy a small moon hammered into the Void Stalker. When the light faded, the creature remained completely unharmed. Impossible, breathed Lieutenant. The Stalker began moving toward them, accelerating with impossible grace for something so massive. As it approached, details became clearer. Crystalline structures jutted from its hide like natural armor, and appendages the size of starship hulls unfolded from its body with predatory intent. Evasive maneuvers, Ra ordered. The Nemesis banked hard to port, its inertial compensators straining to keep the crew from being crushed by G-forces. But the Stalker moved with them, matching their course corrections with casual ease. It's too fast, the helmsman reported. I can't shake it. One of the creature's appendages lashed out, striking the ship's starboard shields. The entire vessel shuddered under the impact, and warning lights flashed across every console. Shields down to 60% from a single hit, engineering reported. Ra's mind raced. Her overwhelming force strategy had failed completely, and now her ship was in mortal danger. The creature was too fast to outrun, too strong to fight directly, and showed no signs of being deterred by their weapons. Another impact shook the ship, this one stronger than the first. Shields at 20%. Commander's voice cut through the chaos, calm despite the desperate situation. Request permission to try a different approach. Pride warred with pragmatism in Ra's mind. Everything she believed about human weakness told her to ignore him. But everything she knew about command responsibility demanded that she consider every option when her crew's lives were at stake. Make it fast, human. The creature's following predictable attack patterns. It's treating us like wounded prey, moving in for a killing strike. But if we make ourselves seem like a bigger threat. Another devastating blow rocked the ship. Shields failing. Do it, Ra snarled. Moved to the tactical console with surprising speed and began entering commands. All stop. Cut engines, drop shields, power down weapons. Are you insane? Security chief roared. You'll get us all killed. Trust me, said, his fingers flying over the controls. Predators expect certain responses from their prey. We're going to give them something unexpected. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of minimal life support as the Nemesis went dark. Through the main screen, they could see the Void Stalker slowing its approach, seemingly confused by their sudden passive stance. Now what? Ra demanded. Now we wait for it to get curious. The massive creature drifted closer, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to different colors as it studied the apparently helpless vessel. Several of its sensory appendages extended toward the ship, probing their hull with gentle touches that barely registered on the sensors. It's investigating us, whispered, trying to figure out if we're dead or playing dead. How does this help us? Because now we know exactly where it is, and it thinks we're helpless. His hand hovered over the engine controls. When I give the word, emergency acceleration, maximum burn, directly toward the research station. That's suicide. No, that's using the creature's size against it. It's 3 times bigger than us, which means it has 3 times more momentum to overcome when it tries to change direction. One of the stalker's appendages began probing their main engine housing and tensed like a coiled spring. Now, the Nemesis exploded into motion, its engines going from 0 to maximum thrust in less than 2 seconds. The sudden acceleration caught the Void Stalker completely off guard, and the ship slipped away from its grasp like a fish escaping a net. But wasn't done. Hard to port, use the station's gravity well. The ship swung around Research Station Echo 7 in a tight orbit, using the facility's mass to accelerate even further. Behind them, the Void Stalker struggled to match their maneuver, its massive bulk working against it as it tried to navigate the complex gravitational fields around the station. It's falling behind, sensors reported with amazement. Not for long, warned. These creatures adapt quickly. We've got maybe 30 seconds before it figures out how to counter this tactic. Then what? Then we see how good this crew really is at precision flying. For the next several minutes, guided the Nemesis through an intricate dance around the research station, using every piece of debris, every gravitational anomaly, and every structural element to their advantage. The Void Stalker pursued them relentlessly, but its size and momentum made it impossible to match their sudden course changes and tight maneuvers. Gradually, the creature began to fall further behind, its hunting pattern disrupted by prey that refused to behave as expected. It's giving up, communications reported with disbelief. The creature is returning to the far side of the station. Ra stared at the tactical display, struggling to process what had just happened. Her ship had been seconds away from destruction, saved only by the tactical insight of the species she had dismissed as weak and primitive. How, she asked quietly. Finally relaxed his grip on the controls. Humans have been prey animals for most of our evolutionary history, Commander. We got very good at understanding predator behavior because our survival depended on it. Sometimes the best way to fight a superior opponent is to make them fight on your terms instead of theirs. The bridge crew was silent, all staring at the small human who had just saved their lives through tactics none of them would have conceived. "Sensors, what's the creature doing now?" Ra asked. "It appears to be leaving, Commander, moving away from the station toward deep space." "And the survivors?" "Picking up weak signals from the remaining escape pods. They're alive, ma'am." As rescue operations began and the immediate danger passed, Ra found herself looking at with new eyes. Perhaps there was more to these humans than anyone had realized. Perhaps their apparent weakness concealed strengths that the galaxy had yet to discover. But she was far from ready to admit such thoughts aloud. Her reputation demanded that she maintain her position of authority, even if her certainty about human inferiority had been badly shaken. The test, however, was far from over. The Void Stalker might be gone, but other challenges awaited, and she was determined to see exactly what this human was truly capable of before she revised any of her fundamental beliefs about his species. 3 days after the Void Stalker incident, Commander Ra found herself in an uncomfortable position. Word of the encounter had spread throughout the ship, and crew members who had previously ignored or dismissed the human advisor now looked at him with something approaching respect. This development troubled her more than she cared to admit. She had spent her entire career building a reputation based on absolute superiority, both personal and tactical. Every member of her crew understood that they served under one of the most capable predators in the galaxy, someone who had never failed to overcome any challenge through strength, cunning, and overwhelming force. The idea that a human had succeeded where her methods had failed was undermining the very foundation of her authority. For his part, seemed completely unaware of the shift in crew dynamics. He continued to perform his duties with quiet efficiency, offering tactical analyses when requested and otherwise staying out of the way. If anything, he appeared to be trying to minimize his role in their recent success, deflecting credit back to the crew's piloting skills and the ship's superior engineering. This modest behavior only made the situation worse from Ra's perspective. A boastful victor she could have confronted and put back in his place. A humble one who let his actions speak for themselves was much harder to dismiss or intimidate. The rescue operation at Research Station Echo 7 had been completed successfully. The 4 surviving escape pods contained 23 researchers and support staff, all of whom owed their lives to unconventional tactics. The recovered data from the station revealed that the Void Stalker had been drawn to the system by experimental psionic research, apparently attracted to the mental emanations the scientists had been studying. Admiral Thane had personally commended the crew for their successful mission, but Ra noticed that his praise had focused unusually heavily on innovative tactical approaches and thinking outside conventional parameters. She suspected that word of the human's contribution had reached Fleet Command, though no one had been tactless enough to mention it directly. Now, as the Nemesis traveled toward their next assignment, she found herself facing a dilemma that went against every instinct she possessed. Her pride demanded that she reassert her dominance and put the human back in his proper place as a subordinate. But her pragmatic side recognized that possessed genuine tactical abilities that could benefit her ship and crew. The solution, she decided, was to test him more thoroughly. One successful encounter with a space predator could have been luck or a fortunate coincidence. If she wanted to truly understand what humans were capable of, she needed to see how performed under a variety of challenging conditions. "Advisor," she called out as the human reviewed sensor data at his station. "Report to my ready room." Looked up from his display, surprised by the summons. "Yes, Commander." Ra's ready room reflected her personality and heritage. The walls were decorated with traditional draconian weapons, trophies from various campaigns, and holographic displays showing the genealogy of her warrior bloodline. The furniture was scaled for someone of her size and build, making most visitors feel small and uncomfortable. Entered and stood at attention, waiting for her to speak. She let the silence stretch for several moments, using her predatory gaze to study him carefully. Up close, all the apparent weaknesses of his species were even more obvious. His skin looked soft and vulnerable. His muscles seemed inadequate for serious combat, and his small size made him appear almost childlike compared to proper warriors. Yet this apparently fragile being had outthought both her and a Void Stalker in the same day. "Tell me about human military doctrine," she said finally. That's a broad topic, Commander. Could you be more specific? How does your species approach warfare? What principles guide your tactical thinking? Consider the question for a moment. Human military philosophy has evolved significantly over our history, but certain themes remain consistent. We tend to emphasize adaptability, asymmetric warfare, and using an enemy's strengths against them. Asymmetric warfare, fighting opponents who are stronger, faster, or better equipped by changing the rules of engagement, making them fight on terrain or under conditions that favor us instead of them. Ra leaned back in her chair, her claws tapping against the armrests. That sounds like the thinking of prey animals who know they cannot win in direct confrontation. Perhaps, acknowledged without seeming offended. But it's also the thinking of survivors. Humans have faced extinction multiple times in our history, both from natural disasters and from conflicts with each other. We learned that raw strength isn't always enough. And what did you learn instead? That intelligence, creativity, and persistence can overcome almost any advantage. That sometimes the best way to defeat a superior opponent is to make them defeat themselves. The concept was foreign to everything Ra had been taught about warfare. Draconian military doctrine emphasized honor, direct confrontation, and the supremacy of the strong over the weak. The idea of deliberately seeking unfair advantages seemed almost cowardly. Your species fought wars against itself? She asked. Constantly. For thousands of years, humans were our own worst enemy. We fought over territory, resources, ideologies, and sometimes just for the sake of fighting. Every conflict taught us something new about tactics, strategy, and survival. And now you apply those lessons against alien species. The principles remain the same. Understanding your enemy, recognizing their weaknesses, and exploiting any advantage you can find. The fact that our opponents might be stronger or more advanced just means we have to be more creative. Ra found this perspective both fascinating and disturbing. The idea that weakness could be transformed into strength through clever thinking challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of combat and hierarchy. I have a proposition for you, advisor, she said slowly. I want to test your tactical abilities more thoroughly. What kind of test? The Nemesis will be participating in war games next week. A large-scale exercise involving multiple fleets and scenario types. I want you to serve as my primary tactical advisor for the duration. Raised an eyebrow. With respect, Commander, that seems like it would undermine Lieutenant's authority. He's your current tactical officer. Lieutenant will retain his position and responsibilities. You will serve as a special advisor, offering alternative perspectives when requested. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Unless you don't think your species' vaunted adaptability is up to the challenge. The subtle challenge in her voice was unmistakable. Met her gaze steadily, and she caught a brief glimpse of something that might have been steel beneath his apparently mild exterior. I'll do my best, Commander. See that you do, dismissed. As left her ready room, Ra allowed herself a small smile. The war games would provide the perfect opportunity to see whether the human's success against the Void Stalker had been a fluke or a genuine demonstration of capability. If he failed under the pressure of complex military exercises, she could dismiss his earlier contribution as beginner's luck and reassert the natural order. If he succeeded. She pushed that possibility from her mind. Humans were newcomers to galactic civilization, primitives who had barely mastered interstellar travel. The idea that they could outthink species with military experience was absurd. The war games were scheduled to take place in the system, using a combination of real starships and sophisticated holographic projections to create realistic combat scenarios. 5 fleets representing different military doctrines would compete against each other in a series of tactical challenges designed to test everything from small unit tactics to large-scale strategic planning. The Nemesis arrived at the exercise area 3 days early, giving Ra time to review the competition and plan her approach. The other participating commanders were all veterans she knew by reputation. Admiral of the Hegemony, whose fleets specialized in swarm tactics and overwhelming numbers. General of the Confederacy, who favored aggressive frontal assaults and personal combat. Commander of the Crystalline Collective, whose geometric formations and mathematical precision were legendary. And Captain Ra of the Trade League, known for unconventional tactics and creative use of civilian technology. Each commander represented a different approach to warfare, and each had achieved significant success using their preferred methods. Ra's own reputation was built on combined arms tactics, using the strengths of different species and ship types to create flexible, adaptable battle groups. The first scenario was announced 24 hours before commencement, a defense of a civilian convoy against superior numbers of attackers. Each fleet would take turns defending a group of transport ships, while the other 4 fleets attacked simultaneously. Points would be awarded based on the number of transports that survived and the efficiency with which the attacking forces were neutralized. Standard convoy protection, Lieutenant observed as he reviewed the scenario parameters. Deploy heavy ships as screens, fighters for close escort, and maintain maximum sensor coverage for early warning. Agreed, Ra said, then glanced at. Advisor, do you see any alternative approaches? Studied the tactical display for several minutes before responding. The scenario assumes that our primary goal is to prevent the transports from being destroyed. But what if we focus on preventing them from being attacked in the first place? Explain. Traditional convoy protection puts the defenders in a reactive position. We wait for the attackers to make their move, then respond to counter their strategy. But what if we force them to react to us instead? He highlighted several positions on the star map. Instead of keeping the convoy together in a tight formation, we scatter the transports and assign each one a different route to the destination. The attackers will have to split their forces to pursue multiple targets, reducing their concentration and making them vulnerable to counterattack. Shook his head. That violates basic escort doctrine. Scattered transports are easier to pick off individually. Only if the attackers can find them all, countered, and only if we're not actively hunting their separated forces. Ra considered the proposal. It was certainly unconventional, and it carried significant risks. But it also had the potential to turn the hunters into the hunted, exactly the kind of tactical reversal that humans seem to specialize in. We'll incorporate elements of both approaches, she decided. Primary convoy follows standard protection protocol, but will deploy 3 decoy groups using advisor scatter pattern. The war games began with considerable fanfare. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to observe the exercises, and military analysts provided real-time commentary on the various tactical approaches being employed. The Nemesis was scheduled to defend during the 3rd round, giving Ra the opportunity to study how the other commanders handled the scenario. Admiral's swarm tactics proved devastatingly effective. Her fleet absorbed terrible losses, but managed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer persistence and numbers. General's aggressive approach resulted in spectacular battles, but relatively few transport survivals. Commander's mathematical precision was beautiful to watch, but seemed to lack adaptability when the attackers deviated from expected patterns. Captain Ra's defense was the most successful so far, using a combination of misdirection, electronic warfare, and creative deployment of modified civilian ships to confuse and frustrate the attacking fleets. When the Nemesis's turn came, Ra felt the weight of expectation from her crew. Everyone knew this was a test of their ship's tactical capabilities, and by extension, a test of her leadership. All ships assume formation, she commanded. Primary convoy will follow route Delta 7. Decoy groups Alpha, Beta, and Gamma will proceed along alternate vectors as planned. The attacking fleets approached from multiple directions, their coordination impressive despite representing different military traditions. Ra watched their deployment carefully, looking for weaknesses in their formation and timing. They're splitting up to pursue the decoys, reported from his position at the tactical station. 3 groups going after the scattered transports, 2 continuing toward the main convoy. Perfect. They're doing exactly what we want them to do. The first phase of the battle went according to plan. The attacking forces found themselves chasing shadows across the system, while the real convoy made steady progress toward the safe zone. But as the exercise continued, Ra realized that their opponents were adapting faster than expected. Commander, sensors reported, the attacking fleets are consolidating. They've identified the real convoy and are moving to intercept. Ra's jaw clenched. Their initial advantage was disappearing, and once the enemy concentrated their forces, the Nemesis would be badly outnumbered. Recommendations. Standard tactics would be to call back our escort groups and concentrate our own forces, suggested. That would work, agreed, but it would also put us right back into a reactive position. What if we do the opposite? Opposite? What if we attack them instead of defending? The suggestion was so unexpected that several bridge officers turned to stare at the human. In a convoy protection scenario, going on the offensive seemed like tactical suicide. Explain your reasoning, Ra demanded. They're expecting us to defend the transports, so they're positioning their forces to attack. But if we suddenly become the aggressors, their formation will be optimized for the wrong kind of battle. Called up a tactical projection showing the current positions of all forces. Look at their deployment. They're spread out in attack formation, perfect for overwhelming a defensive position but vulnerable to concentrated assault on their flanks. Ra studied the display, her predatory mind recognizing the opportunity. You're suggesting we abandon the transports to attack their fleet. Not abandon, redirect. If we hit their command ship hard enough and fast enough, we can disrupt their coordination. Without central command, their individual groups will be easier to defeat piecemeal. It was exactly the kind of high-risk, high-reward strategy that could either win the scenario decisively or result in complete disaster. Ra felt her warrior instincts responding to the challenge. All ships new orders, she announced. Escorts will continue protecting the convoy. Nemesis and Heavy Cruiser Squadron will engage enemy command group directly. Commander, that's highly irregular, communications warned. The exercise parameters specifically state that convoy protection is the primary objective. And the best way to protect the convoy is to eliminate the threat to it, Ra replied. All ships attack formation, we're going hunting. The Nemesis surged forward, leading her heavy ships in a direct assault on the center of the attacking fleet. The enemy commanders, caught completely off guard by the sudden reversal, struggled to adapt their formations to meet the unexpected threat. Target their command ship, Ra ordered. All weapons concentrated fire. The exercise's holographic systems created a spectacular light show as the combined firepower of 3 heavy cruisers hammered into Admiral's flagship. The simulation registered critical damage to the enemy vessel's command and control systems, effectively removing it from the battle. Enemy fleet coordination is breaking down, reported with satisfaction. Individual groups are operating independently now. What followed was a systematic destruction of the scattered attacking forces. Without central coordination, each enemy group found itself outnumbered and outmaneuvered by defenders who could concentrate their forces at will. Within 30 minutes, the attacking fleet had been decisively defeated with minimal losses to the convoy. The observation deck erupted in surprised commentary as analysts tried to understand what they had just witnessed. No one had ever seen convoy protection turned into an offensive operation, and the results spoke for themselves. Exercise complete, the umpires announced. Defending fleet achieves total victory. All convoy vessels reach safe zone intact. Ra allowed herself a moment of satisfaction as congratulations poured in from across the fleet. The Nemesis had not just succeeded, they had redefined what success looked like. But as the excitement died down and the crew began preparing for the next scenario, she found herself troubled by an uncomfortable realization. The victory had been achieved using human tactical thinking, not draconian military doctrine. This unconventional approach had proven superior to traditional methods that had served her species for. Impressive work, advisor, she said quietly as the bridge crew celebrated around them. Thank you, Commander, but it was your decision to implement the strategy. Leadership under pressure is what made it work. His diplomatic response only deepened her confusion. By all rights, the human should have been boasting about his tactical insight and claiming credit for their success. Instead, he was deflecting praise and acknowledging her role as commander. This was not how prey animals were supposed to behave. The second scenario would be announced soon, and Ra found herself genuinely curious to see what would suggest next. Despite her reservations about human capabilities, she was beginning to suspect that there might be more to these newcomers than anyone in the galaxy realized. The second scenario was announced at dawn the following day, and it immediately presented challenges that made the convoy protection exercise seem simple by comparison. Each fleet would be tasked with infiltrating and capturing a heavily defended space station, while simultaneously preventing the other 4 fleets from accomplishing the same objective. Multi-faction competitive assault, Lieutenant summarized as he read through the parameters. The station is defended by automated systems and has multiple critical objectives that must be secured simultaneously. First fleet to control all objectives wins. Ra studied the tactical display showing the target station. It was a massive structure built into an asteroid, with weapon emplacements, shield generators, and defensive platforms creating overlapping fields of fire around all approach vectors. The designers had clearly intended to create an impregnable fortress that would require overwhelming force to crack. Standard assault doctrine would be to concentrate our entire fleet against the weakest section of their defenses, she mused. Punch through with heavy ships and establish a beachhead for boarding parties. That's what the other commanders will expect, observed. And with 5 fleets all trying the same approach, it becomes a race to see who can break through first. You see an alternative. Was quiet for several minutes, studying the station schematics with intense concentration. When he finally spoke, his suggestion was so unexpected that Ra wondered if she had misheard him. What if we don't attack the station at all? Explain. The objective is to control the critical systems, not to destroy the station. What if there's a way to accomplish that without fighting through the defenses? He highlighted several sections of the asteroid base. This station was built using standard galactic construction protocols. That means it has maintenance tunnels, service corridors, and emergency access points that might not be as heavily defended as the main approaches. Shook his head dismissively. Those passages are too small for assault troops and would be monitored by security sensors. Too small for our species, yes, agreed. But humans are smaller than most galactic races, and we have a lot of experience with infiltration and covert operations. The suggestion was audacious beyond belief. Was proposing to personally infiltrate the space station while 4 enemy fleets battled for control of the main approaches. It was the kind of desperate gambit that could only be conceived by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the realities of modern warfare. Absolutely not, Ra declared. I will not risk crew members on such a reckless scheme. With respect, Commander, it's not as reckless as it sounds. While the other fleets are focused on the big battle outside, a small team could slip in through the maintenance systems and take control from within. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the station would already be ours. And if you're detected, then we abort the mission and fall back to conventional assault tactics. But if we succeed, we win the entire exercise without a single ship-to-ship engagement. Ra found herself caught between professional caution and intellectual curiosity. The plan was undeniably dangerous, but it also demonstrated exactly the kind of unconventional thinking that had made successful against the Void Stalker. If it worked, the Nemesis would achieve a victory that would be talked about for years. You would lead this infiltration personally. Yes, ma'am. I know human capabilities and limitations better than anyone else on this ship, and if something goes wrong, I'd rather risk my own life than someone else's. The offer to take personal responsibility for the mission's risks impressed Ra despite her reservations. Most tactical advisors preferred to remain safely aboard ship, while others implemented their strategies. What would you need? A small shuttle, basic infiltration gear, and maybe 2 volunteers who are small enough to fit through maintenance tunnels. I'll go, Lieutenant volunteered immediately. And Ensign from engineering. She's our smallest crew member and knows station systems better than anyone. Ra was surprised by her tactical officer's willingness to support what she considered a human scheme. Was a traditionalist who usually favored conventional military approaches. You think this plan has merit, Lieutenant? I think Advisor has shown a talent for seeing opportunities that others miss, replied carefully. And even if the infiltration fails, it will serve as a useful distraction while we prepare our primary assault. The logic was sound, even if the strategy remained wildly unconventional. Ra made her decision based on what had become her new guiding principle. If was right, the Nemesis would win decisively. If he was wrong, they could still fall back on traditional tactics. Very well, you have permission to attempt infiltration. But the moment the situation becomes untenable, you abort and return to the ship. Understood. Understood, Commander. Preparations for the mission began immediately. Requisitioned a small maintenance shuttle, the kind of utility craft used for routine repairs on space stations. It was completely unarmed and carried minimal shielding, but it was also so common that it might be overlooked among the chaos of a major battle. The infiltration team consisted of lieutenant and ensign, a diminutive whose natural agility and technical expertise made her ideal for navigating cramped mechanical spaces. The plan was elegantly simple. Approach the station during the initial assault, dock at a maintenance port while the defenders were distracted by the larger battle, and make their way to the control centers through service corridors. "Remember," briefed his team as they prepared to launch, "our goal is to reach the primary command center and the shield control room simultaneously. Once we have those, we can disable the station's defenses and allow our fleet to dock safely." "And if we encounter station security?" asked. "Avoid contact if possible. If confrontation is unavoidable, Ensign will handle electronic countermeasures while we provide cover, but our best weapon is stealth." The exercise began precisely at noon, with all 5 fleets converging on the asteroid station from different vectors. The opening salvos were spectacular, as dozens of capital ships exchanged fire with the station's defensive batteries, while fighters and bombers swarmed through the battle zone like angry insects. "All ships commence assault," Ra ordered over the fleet communication channel. "Focus fire on the northern shield generators." While the Nemesis and her escorts engaged in the massive space battle, the small maintenance shuttle carrying the infiltration team slipped away unnoticed. Piloted the craft with careful precision, using debris from the ongoing firefight as cover while approaching the station's outer hull. "Docking port 7 Alpha coming into view," he reported quietly. "No sign of defensive activity in this sector." "Because this sector is supposedly protected by the shields and weapons that are currently shooting at our fleet," observed. The shuttle settled against the station's hull with barely a whisper of contact. Ensign immediately began work on the airlock controls, her slender fingers dancing over the electronic interfaces with practiced skill. "Standard security encryption," she reported. "Give me 30 seconds." Monitored the tactical situation while she worked. Outside, the space battle was intensifying as the 5 fleets pressed their attacks against different sections of the station. Admiral's swarm tactics were already beginning to overwhelm the automated defenses on the eastern approach, while General's ships hammered the southern shields with concentrated firepower. "We're in," O announced. The airlock cycled, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor that stretched away into the depths of the station. Emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, and the air carried the distinctive smell of recycled atmosphere and mechanical lubricants. "Station schematics show the command center is approximately 800 meters inward," said, consulting his tactical display. "Shield control is in the opposite direction, about 600 meters. "We split up?" asked. "Negative. We stick together until we reach the first junction, then divide into teams. And I will take shield control. You handle the command center." They moved through the corridors with practiced stealth, their soft-soled boots making virtually no sound on the metal flooring. The station's internal security appeared to be focused entirely on the main access points, leaving the maintenance areas unmonitored except for automated sensors that are easily bypassed. "External battle update," whispered into his communicator. "How are things proceeding out there?" "Admiral has breached the eastern shields," Ra's voice replied. "General is making progress on the southern approach. You need to move faster." The pressure of time drove them deeper into the station. At the first major junction, they split up as planned, with heading toward the command center and a continued toward shield control. The shield control room turned out to be a massive chamber filled with towering energy conduits and control panels that managed the station's defensive systems. 2 automated sentries guarded the entrance, but their programming was designed to counter armed assault troops, not infiltrators who approached from maintenance tunnels. "Can you disable the sentries without triggering alarms?" asked. "Better than that," A replied with a grin. "I can reprogram them to think we're authorized maintenance personnel." While she worked her electronic magic, studied the shield control systems. The setup was more complex than he had anticipated, with multiple redundant systems and fail-safes designed to prevent exactly the kind of sabotage they were attempting. "These systems are too sophisticated to simply shut down," he realized. But what if we don't shut them down? What if we redirect them? Redirect how? Shield generators work by projecting energy fields in specific patterns. What if we changed those patterns to protect our ships instead of the station? A's eyes widened as she understood the implications. Turn the station's own shields into a safe corridor for our fleet. That's brilliant. Can you do it? Give me 5 minutes. One of the shield generators contacted to check on his progress with the command center. I'm in position, the lieutenant reported. But there are 6 security guards here, and they're definitely not automated. I can't take them all without raising alarms. Wait for my signal, replied. We're about to create a very big distraction. The moment I finished her reprogramming, the entire character of the space battle changed. The station's shields suddenly reconfigured themselves, creating a protected corridor that led directly to the main docking bays. The automated weapons systems, detecting what their programming interpreted as a massive shield failure, began emergency shutdown procedures. What's happening? Came confused voices from the exercise controllers. The station's defenses are collapsing, Admiral reported with amazement. All fleets press your attacks. In the chaos that followed, easily overwhelmed the confused security guards in the command center. Within minutes, both critical objectives were under their control, and was able to send the signal that ended the exercise. Mission accomplished, he reported to Commander Ra. Station is secure. The silence that followed was profound. On the observation deck, military analysts stared at their displays in disbelief. No one had ever seen a heavily fortified position captured by a 3-person infiltration team while 4 fleets battled uselessly outside. Exercise complete, the umpires finally announced. Nemesis achieves total victory through capture of all critical objectives. The reaction from the other fleet commanders was immediate and vocal. Demands for clarification, accusations of cheating, and requests for detailed explanations flooded the communication channels. How had a single small ship defeated defenses that had withstood the combined assault of 4 major fleets? It was a legitimate tactical operation, Admiral Thane's voice cut through the protests. Unconventional, but entirely within the parameters of the exercise. The Nemesis crew identified a vulnerability that others missed and exploited it successfully. As the infiltration team returned to their ship, Ra found herself grappling with emotions she had never experienced before. Pride in her crew's success warred with confusion about her own role in the victory. She had authorized the mission, but the strategic insight had come entirely from. Outstanding work, all of you, she announced as the team reported to the bridge. That was perhaps the most innovative tactical operation I have ever witnessed. Thank you, Commander, replied. But it only worked because of Lieutenant's courage and Ensign A's technical expertise, and because you were willing to trust an unconventional approach. There was that diplomatic deflection again, giving credit to everyone except himself while acknowledging her authority as commander. Ra was beginning to understand that this was not weakness or false modesty, but rather a sophisticated understanding of leadership dynamics. The 3rd scenario will be announced tomorrow, she said. I trust you'll have equally creative suggestions for that challenge as well. I'll do my best, Commander. As the crew dispersed to celebrate their victory, Ra remained on the bridge, staring out at the stars and trying to process what she had learned about humans and about herself. Every assumption she had held about the weakness and inferiority of species had been challenged by his performance in these exercises. But more disturbing was the growing realization that her own tactical thinking had become more flexible and creative under his influence. She was starting to question fundamental beliefs about strength, honor, and the proper conduct of warfare that had guided her entire career. The final 2 scenarios would determine whether these victories had been flukes, or the 3rd scenario shattered every precedent the war games had established. Instead of another tactical exercise, the umpires announced something that had never been attempted before: a survival challenge against actual hostile forces. A rogue has seized control of the Altair mining colony, Admiral Thane explained via emergency transmission. They're holding 2,000 civilian hostages and have declared the system to be under new management. This is no longer a simulation. The transformation of the war games from exercise to actual combat operation sent shockwaves through all 5 fleets. What had begun as a friendly competition between allied forces had suddenly become a real mission with genuine life-or-death consequences. Intelligence reports indicate that consists of at least 12 heavy cruisers and supporting vessels under the command of War Chief, Admiral Thane continued. This is the same group responsible for the Rigel system massacres. They do not negotiate, they do not show mercy, and they consider civilian casualties to be acceptable losses. Ra felt her blood chill at the mention of Sna's name. Every military officer in the galaxy knew about the War Chief's reputation for brutality and his complete disregard for any rules of civilized warfare. If he had taken hostages, their lives were measured in hours, not days. All fleet commanders will coordinate their response under emergency protocols, the Admiral concluded. Civilian lives are the priority. Secondary objectives include elimination of the rogue force and recapture of colonial assets. The bridge of the Nemesis erupted into controlled chaos as the crew shifted from exercise mode to actual combat readiness. Weapons systems that had been running simulations were now loaded with live ammunition. Shields were raised to maximum power. Throughout the ship, personnel began the grim preparations for real warfare. Tactical assessment, Ra commanded as soon as the briefing ended. Lieutenant called up intelligence data on their screens. War Chief is a traditionalist who favors overwhelming force and intimidation tactics. His ships are heavily armed but not particularly maneuverable. Standard doctrine emphasizes frontal assault and personal combat. What about the colony? Altair Station is built into a large asteroid with extensive mining facilities. 3,000 permanent residents, plus transient miners and trading vessels. The hostages are reportedly being held in the central residential complex. Ra studied the data carefully. His reputation was built on exactly the kind of direct, brutal warfare that her own species excelled at. This would be a battle between traditional military doctrines, the sort of engagement where superior firepower and aggressive tactics would determine the outcome. Recommendations for approach, she asked. Coordinate with the other fleets for a multi-vector assault, suggested. Hit them from multiple directions simultaneously to prevent them from concentrating their defenses. Agreed, signal Admiral and the other commanders. We'll need to. Commander interrupted quietly. May I suggest a different approach? Ra paused, remembering how his unconventional thinking had proven successful in previous scenarios. But this was no longer an exercise with simulated consequences. Real lives hung in the balance, and the margin for error was zero. Speak quickly. War Chief is expecting us to attack his ships. It's what any military commander would do in this situation. But what if we focus on the hostages instead? Explain. Move to the tactical display, highlighting various sections of the mining colony. Is using the civilians as both shields and bargaining chips. But that also creates a vulnerability. He has to keep them alive and relatively unharmed, or his leverage disappears. How does that help us? Because it means he's divided his forces between ship-to-ship combat readiness and hostage security. If we can neutralize the guards holding the civilians, we eliminate his primary advantage. Shook his head. Impossible. The colony's too heavily defended. Any rescue attempt would trigger massive retaliation against the hostages. Not if we do it right, replied. What if we create multiple rescue operations simultaneously? Hit every guard post, security checkpoint, and detention facility at exactly the same moment. With what forces? We'd need hundreds of troops for that kind of coordinated assault. No, said slowly, we'd need the hostages themselves. The bridge fell silent as the implications of his suggestion became clear. Was proposing to arm the civilian captives and turn them into combatants against their captors. That's insane, someone whispered. It's also exactly what won't expect, continued. Psychology emphasizes dominance and submission. They assume that conquered enemies will remain passive and obedient. The idea that civilians might fight back violates their fundamental worldview. Ra found herself torn between admiration for the audacity of the plan and horror at its potential consequences. If the rescue attempt failed, the hostages would face brutal retaliation. If it succeeded, it would represent a complete revolution in hostage rescue tactics. How would we coordinate such an operation? We get someone inside the colony. Someone who can make contact with the hostage groups and organize them into resistance cells. And who exactly do you propose for this suicide mission? Met her gaze steadily. Me. Absolutely not, Ra said immediately. I will not authorize such a reckless. Commander, he interrupted with unusual firmness, this is what humans do. We've been fighting against superior opponents for our entire evolutionary history. Guerrilla warfare, resistance movements, turning weakness into strength, these are our specialties. The risks are acceptable compared to the alternative. How many hostages will die if we try a conventional assault? How many of our own people will we lose fighting through defenses? Lieutenant surprised everyone by supporting the humans' proposal. He has a point, Commander. Traditional rescue operations against fortified positions have terrible casualty rates, and we've seen what Advisor can accomplish with unconventional tactics. Ra realized that her crew was beginning to trust judgment more than her own traditional military instincts. The thought was deeply unsettling, but she couldn't deny the evidence of his previous successes. What would you need? A small infiltration craft, basic equipment for improvised weapons, and communication gear to coordinate with the fleet when the operation begins. And how exactly do you plan to get inside a heavily guarded mining colony? Smiled grimly. The same way I got into that space station, through the maintenance tunnels that nobody expects anyone to use. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was more complex and dangerous than anything they had attempted before. Would infiltrate the colony through its mining equipment access tunnels, make contact with hostage leaders, and begin organizing resistance cells. Meanwhile, the 5 fleets would position themselves for a coordinated assault that would begin precisely when the internal uprising commenced. Remember, briefed his mission parameters one final time, the goal is not to defeat forces directly. The goal is to create enough chaos and confusion that his command structure breaks down. Once the hostages are free and his troops are fighting on multiple fronts, the fleet assault will finish the job. And if you're captured, Ra asked, then you proceed with conventional rescue tactics and hope for the best. The infiltration shuttle launched under cover of routine patrol movements, its signature masked among the dozens of small craft moving between the various fleet positions. Piloted the vehicle himself, using the same careful approach techniques that had proven successful during the war games. Altair Station loomed ahead, its surface by decades of mining operations that had carved deep tunnels and caverns into the asteroid's structure. Warships patrolled the approaches with predictable patterns, their crews confident that no significant threat could penetrate their security perimeter. Approaching docking point 77 Alpha, reported quietly. No sign of hostile activity in this sector. The maintenance access he had chosen was located deep within the mining complex, far from the residential areas where the hostages were being held. His route to the civilian quarters would take him through kilometers of abandoned tunnels and equipment bays, but it would also keep him away from the heaviest concentrations of guards. Docking complete, beginning infiltration. The next several hours were among the most tense that Ra had ever experienced. Periodic status reports from painted a picture of careful progress through the colony's infrastructure, but the communication delays and the constant danger of discovery made every moment agonizing. Contact established with hostage leadership, came the report she had been waiting for. Dr. Sarah, the colony administrator, has maintained covert contact between different groups. They're ready to organize. Dr. Ra noticed the shared surname. Relation of yours. My sister, replied simply. She was visiting the colony on a mineral survey when attacked. The personal dimension of the mission added a new layer of complexity to Ra's understanding of her human advisor. This was not just a tactical operation for him. It was a rescue mission for his own family. Resistance cells forming in all major hostage areas, continued. We'll need another 6 hours to complete preparations. 6 hours during which forces might discover the infiltration and begin executing prisoners. 6 hours during which the war chief might grow impatient and start making examples of his captives to encourage cooperation from the approaching fleets. All fleets maintain current positions, Ra ordered over the communication channel. Do not take any action that might provoke retaliation against the hostages. The waiting was torture, but as the hours passed, reports became increasingly optimistic. The hostages were organizing themselves into coordinated groups, each with specific objectives and timing. Improvised weapons were being constructed from mining equipment and maintenance tools. Most importantly, the guards remained completely unaware that their prisoners were preparing for revolt. Final preparations complete, finally reported. All resistance cells are in position. Fleet assault can begin in 30 minutes. Understood, all ships prepare for coordinated attack. Wait for my signal. Ra watched the chronometer count down the final minutes, her claws extended and her breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything depended on precise timing and flawless execution. If the fleet attacked too early, the hostages would be slaughtered. If they attacked too late, forces would have time to regroup after crushing the internal uprising. 10 seconds to operation commencement, she announced. All ships stand by. 5432, mark. The battle for Altair Station began with explosions echoing through the colony's corridors as resistance cells struck guard posts and security checkpoints simultaneously. For critical minutes, confusion reigned as forces found themselves fighting enemies that weren't supposed to exist. "This is impossible," War Chief's voice roared over intercepted communications. "Civilians do not fight, they submit or they die." But these civilians were being led by someone who understood both human psychology and guerrilla warfare tactics. Instead of submitting, they attacked. Instead of cowering, they fought with the desperate courage of people defending their families and homes. "Fleet assault commencing," Ra ordered as the chaos inside the colony reached its peak. The 5 fleets struck forces from multiple directions, their coordinated assault timed to coincide with the internal uprising. Caught between enemies outside and within, the found itself unable to mount an effective defense. "Enemy command ship taking heavy damage," sensors reported. "They're trying to fall back." "Do not let them escape," Ra commanded. "War Chief answers for his crimes today." The battle was brutal but brief. Divided and confused, forces could not match the concentrated firepower of 5 coordinated fleets. Within 2 hours, the last enemy vessel had been destroyed or captured, and the colony was secure. "Casualty reports coming in," communications announced. "Preliminary numbers show fewer than 50 civilian deaths and minimal fleet losses." Ra closed her eyes and felt her entire body sag with relief. They had won, and they had saved nearly all of the hostages in the process. "Advisor, report," she called over the communication channel. "Mission accomplished, Commander. The colony is secure and my sister sends her thanks." As rescue operations began and the surviving forces were taken into custody, Ra found herself contemplating the implications of what had just occurred. A human tactical advisor had conceived and executed a rescue operation that saved 2,000 lives while defeating a superior enemy force. More importantly, he had done it using methods that no traditional military doctrine would have even considered. The idea of arming civilians and turning them into combatants violated every principle of civilized warfare, yet it had proven devastatingly effective. "Commander," Lieutenant approached her command chair. "The other fleet commanders are requesting a tactical debrief. They want to understand how we achieved such a decisive victory with minimal losses." "Schedule the briefing for tomorrow," she replied. "I need time to process what happened here myself." The aftermath of the Altair Station rescue operation created ripple effects throughout the entire Galactic Defense Force that no one had anticipated. Within hours of the mission's completion, requests for tactical briefings were flooding in from fleet commands across known space. The idea that civilians could be turned into effective combatants, that hostage situations could be resolved through internal uprising rather than external force, challenged fundamental assumptions about military doctrine. Commander Ra found herself at the center of a growing storm of attention and controversy. Military traditionalists argued that arming civilians violated established rules of engagement and set dangerous precedents for future conflicts. Progressive strategists hailed the operation as a revolutionary breakthrough that opened entirely new possibilities for asymmetric warfare. "Admiral Thane wishes to speak with you privately," Lieutenant announced as he approached her command chair. Ra had been expecting this conversation. The success of unconventional tactics had elevated their profile throughout the fleet, but it had also attracted scrutiny from senior commanders who questioned whether such methods were appropriate for regular military use. "Transfer the call to my ready room," she ordered. Admiral Thane's image appeared on her private communication screen moments later. The Massive's expression was unreadable, but she could sense tension in his bearing that suggested this was more than a routine debrief. "Commander Ra," he began without preamble, "your recent tactical innovations have attracted considerable attention from Fleet Command. I assume you're referring to advisors' contributions to our operational effectiveness." "Among other things, yes. Tell me, do you believe these methods are suitable for widespread adoption throughout the fleet?" The question was loaded with implications. Ra understood that her answer could determine not only her own future, but also the role that human tactical thinking might play in galactic military doctrine. "Admiral, I believe that tactical flexibility and creative problem-solving are always valuable assets. Advisor has demonstrated abilities that complement traditional military approaches." "Complement or replace?" "Complement, sir. His insights work best when integrated with established doctrine, not substituted for it." Admiral Thane nodded slowly. "An interesting perspective, because I have one final test for your advisor, Commander, something that will determine whether human tactical thinking has a permanent place in the Galactic Defense Force." Ra felt a chill of apprehension. "What kind of test?" "The kind that has no safety net, no simulation protocols, no exercise parameters, and no second chances." His expression grew grimmer. "We've received reports of massive energy signatures in the Vega system. Something is emerging from deep space, and preliminary scans suggest it's unlike anything we've encountered before." The implications hit her immediately. First contact with an unknown alien species was the most dangerous and unpredictable situation any military commander could face. Without intelligence about their capabilities, intentions, or psychology, every decision carried the potential for disaster. Fleet composition. The Nemesis will lead a task force consisting of 12 ships from various fleets. You'll have representatives from every major military tradition in the galaxy, and they'll all be watching to see how human tactical thinking performs under ultimate pressure. And if we fail, then humanity's experiment in galactic military service ends before it truly begins. The weight of responsibility that Admiral Thane was placing on her shoulders was staggering. Not only was she being asked to handle first contact with an unknown species, but the performance of her human advisor would determine the future role of his entire species in galactic affairs. "Understood, Admiral. When do we depart?" "Immediately. The energy signatures are growing stronger and..." As the Nemesis set course for the fleet rendezvous point, Ra realized that her entire understanding of warfare, leadership, and the nature of strength had been fundamentally altered by her experiences with. The final scenario of the war games would determine whether these changes represented evolution or revolution in her thinking. But either way, she suspected that the galaxy would never look quite the same to her again are indicators of a genuinely superior approach to military operations. Either way, Ra suspected that her relationship with her human advisor was going to become far more complicated than she had ever anticipated. The galaxy's balance of power might be shifting in ways that no one fully understood yet, and the implications of that possibility were both thrilling and terrifying to contemplate. The question was whether she was prepared to accept the implications of that possibility. After all, one successful tactic did not make someone a warrior. It would take much more than that to earn her respect.